Hello everyone, Toaster here, your third most favorite kitchen appliance, and in today's video, we will be covering the Hypertube cannon. That's right, the cannon of Hypertubes, which we can use to launch ourselves insane distances across the map. This video is going to be divided into two parts. The first part will be your quick build guide, and the second part will be a more thorough build guide with a full in-depth breakdown of the Hypertube cannon and its functionality. As always, you can skip to your desired section by clicking on the bookmarks in the description below. For those who are just looking for a quick build guide, let's get started. First, start by placing down a single Hypertube support, facing in your desired direction of travel. Then switch to your Hypertube tunnel and connect it to that first support. This will allow you to place down more supports, but with a tunnel in between them. So go ahead and place down an odd number of supports, each one immediately after the other and leaving no gaps in between. The longer you make the cannon, the further it will launch you. So once you have built it to your desired length, leave the first and last supports, but go ahead and delete every other support that you place down. Next, there will be two Hypertube tunnel segments in between each of those supports, but we have to delete one of those. You're going to delete the tunnel that is closer to the exit side of your cannon. To explain it easier, face the side of your Hypertube cannon. If your exit is on your left, then go ahead and delete the left Hypertube tunnel segment. Do this for each set of tunnels in between every support. Now, place down the exit to your cannon by dragging out a Hypertube tunnel from the last support. Press R to change your build mode to noodle to allow the easier placement of your exit tunnel. Place the exit support at least a half foundation away from your cannon. You can use the scroll wheel to change it to your desired angle, and you could raise the exit support to your desired height as well. After that, place down a Hypertube entrance on each one of those supports, except the exit support. Make sure they are facing in the proper direction, and then go ahead and power every single one of them. This will then complete your cannon. Now be sure to grab a jetpack and some fuel, and then you can go ahead and test it out. You may have to save and reload a number of times to fine-tune your trajectory. And that finishes the quick build guide. But now let's do a complete and thorough breakdown on its construction and explore some of its finer details. First, we will need to unlock Hypertubes from the hub, which you can do by satisfying the requirements of the Hypertube tab in Tier 4. Yes, Tier 4. We can get this insane form of travel rather early in the game. Regular Hypertubes are a nifty little form of transportation, allowing us to enter a Hypertube entrance, which will then transport us along a linear set of Hypertube tunnels, all the way to our exit. So long as we have our Hypertube entrances powered, it can be used to effortlessly traverse great distances and great heights without having to use ladders, and is far more reliable than jump pads too. This efficient form of transportation has tons of freedom in how you can set it up, and it is great to use to tackle the vertical height challenges in your factory, ultimately acting similar to that of an elevator. But we can also use Hypertubes to create a Hypertube cannon. The Hypertube cannon is an unintentional mechanic of the game that has been abused by the community to the point in which it has become a well-known feature. When we enter and immediately exit a Hypertube, it generates an extra bit of momentum, flinging us forward with just a noticeable amount of extra speed. But by chaining together a bunch of Hypertube entrances in a linear path, we can abuse the Hypertube mechanic to consecutively generate an increasing amount of speed. And that generated momentum can then be aimed in any direction with a single Hypertube exit tunnel. Hypertube cannons that are built long enough can generate enough momentum to the point where it can literally launch you to space. In order to fully construct this behemoth, not only will we need to unlock Hypertubes from the hub, but we will also need the following resources. For our Hypertubes, we will need copper sheets, pipes, rotors, encased industrial beams, concrete, and iron plates. In addition, we will also need resources to construct a number of power poles of your choosing, along with extra cables to be used for the construction of power lines. And also be sure to grab a few extra resources to build and construct your desired foundations. For this example, I will be using the Mark I power pole, which requires wire, iron rods, and concrete, and I will be using the standard Fix-It foundation, which just requires iron plates and concrete. Now, a Hypertube cannon is best paired with the jetpack, which unfortunately is not unlocked until Tier 6. Now, in the meantime, you could still use a parachute instead, but trust me, you're eventually going to want to have the jetpack with this. And jetpack fuel, don't forget that. Now, let's get started on our in-depth build guide. First, get an idea as to the general direction in which you want your cannon to launch you towards, and moving forward, we will construct the cannon in relation to that. To make construction easy, lay down a length of foundations to build on, and of course, facing the proper direction in relation to the direction that you just chose. Then, first lay down a single Hypertube support. This will be our start point or the entrance to our cannon. Then select the Hypertube tunnel and attach it to the end of that support. This will allow you to place down another Hypertube support as an endpoint, but at the same time it will also build a Hypertube tunnel in between those supports as well. Place down that Hypertube support immediately after the first one. Then rinse and repeat to your desired length, making sure that you have an odd number of Hypertube supports placed down. In this example, including the initial support that I built off of, I have a grand total of 25 supports. Now go back to your start point. Leave the starting support, but go ahead and begin to delete every other Hypertube support. In this example, we are now left with 13 Hypertube supports. Now, if you'll notice, there are 2 Hypertube tunnels in between all of our supports, but we only need one of these, specifically the outgoing ones. So now you're going to go in between each set of your Hypertube supports, keep those outgoing tubes, and delete the incoming ones. A bit difficult to explain, I know, but follow along with the video to get a better idea on how to do this. Now we're doing this because if we have both the outgoing and incoming segment between the supports, we will not be able to place down Hypertube entrances on every single support, defeating the purpose of the cannon. And we need the piece of outgoing tube on every single support, or else the Hypertube entrances won't work at all, effectively making the cannon impossible to use. And finally, if we do it in the reverse way, by keeping the incoming segments, we will not be able to place down the Hypertube entrances facing in the proper direction. So again, make sure that you keep the outgoing tunnels, but delete the incoming ones. Next up, we're going to build our exit. Whip out the Hypertube tunnel again, and you'll notice that the build mode is most likely going to be on auto. Go ahead and press R until the build mode says Noodle. This just makes it easier for the new Hypertube tunnel to be able to snap to our exit support. Now go all the way to the exit side of your cannon. Drag out a Hypertube tunnel from it, and place down the new support at a minimum of a half foundation away from the last one. Click it once to place it down, then if desired you can aim your mouse cursor up to raise it higher, then finally scroll the mouse wheel to change its angle. We're just going to go ahead and eyeball it for now, aiming it in the general direction of where we think we're going to land. This will do for now, but in order to get a proper trajectory, we are going to have to adjust this through trial and error. Also, in this example, I have placed the exit in line with the rest of the cannon. However, note that you can also build it off to the side as well. As always, just build it to suit your needs. You may notice that we are quite limited in the direction that we can aim our Hypertube exit when building on foundations. You may opt to build on the terrain to make finer adjustments, but that may not always be possible. However, you can make finer adjustments to the exit of the Hypertube cannon when building on foundations by first dragging any item of your choosing out of your inventory, which will then place that item into the world and onto the ground. We can then place a Hypertube support on top of that, and we will then be able to rotate it with more freedom. When doing this, I like to use iron plates because they are nice and flat and it will keep our support low to the ground, thus preventing the supports from appearing to float in midair. Also, remember to pick up your item when you are finished to suppress that OCD urge that burns within you. Finally, from the build menu, select the Hypertube entrance, and you are going to place down one of these on every single one of those Hypertube supports, except for that last exit support that we just built. Now, if you do place an entrance on the last exit support, the cannon will still function perfectly fine. However, if you accidentally enter the cannon at the exit side, then you will get stuck inside your cannon, and you will have to delete it in order to get out of it. When doing this, ensure that you have these entrances directly on the supports and facing in the proper direction of travel. As you may notice, you can place the entrances in between the supports, but they will be facing in the wrong direction. So again, make sure that you are placing them down properly. Now we need to power every single one of those entrances. So go ahead and whip out those power poles. It doesn't matter how you place them down or connect them, just ensure that they are all powered. But if you wish to abide by Fix-It standards, then making them neat and tidy is preferred. Note that each Hypertube entrance requires 10 megawatts of power each, so a 13 segment long Hypertube like this is going to require a total of 130 megawatts of power, which is not a steep investment at all. Once you have every single one of those Hypertube entrances powered, you will notice that it is allowed as you can incorporate a power switch into your build if desired, so that at the mere flick of a switch, you can delay the loss of your hearing until you check yourself into a retirement home. Now that it's powered, it's all good to go. But don't hop it in yet. Ah, jeez, man, why'd you do that? First, be sure to save your game, as we will need to test fire this a few times in order to zero in our distance and trajectory. Again, be sure to have your jetpack equipped and be sure to have jetpack fuel on you before you enter the cannon. If you don't have the jetpack unlocked yet, then a parachute will do for now. I will mention now that if you choose to use a parachute, then keep in mind that you will not be able to deploy the parachute until you have reached the peak of your trajectory and begin descending towards the ground. This can cause problems for you in controlling your trajectory and landing, especially if you build an extra long cannon that generates a lot of speed. I highly recommend using the jetpack whenever you use a Hypertube cannon. Okay, enough talking. Go ahead and test out your cannon. Do a little prayer, and then simply hop in the entrance, and behold! You are now getting flung across the map at insane speeds. When you are in the air, you can use the movement keys to make finer adjustments to your trajectory. This can also be further improved by utilizing the jetpack to also enhance your movements, to extend your flight distance, which you can do by simply tapping the jump button, or even in some scenarios, to bring you to a stop when you are mid-flight. But make sure that you leave a modest amount of fuel left over to ensure a safe landing. So, how did it go? Did it undershoot? Was it slightly off in the wrong direction? Did the exit shoot you out at too high of an angle? Well, let's go ahead and reload our save to bring us back to the cannon, so that we can make some adjustments to it. Of course! Right when I'm in the middle of recording! Ugh. Let's see, do I want to send an error report? I guess. I wonder where that even goes. Well, wherever it goes, I'm sure that it will be put to good use. Anyway, back to optimizing our cannon. I found that this 13 segment long cannon was just a little weak. We can do better than that, so I'm going to make this 17 segments long now. Also, I can already tell that it is not firing me in the right direction, so I'm going to adjust the exit tube and I'm going to aim it off to the side. And I did not like the angle at which it shot me out at. I thought it was just a bit too steep, so I'm going to change the angle to be a little lower as well. Now that those adjustments were made, let's see the new results. There. Can still use some finer adjustments, but overall much better. Again, in order to set up the Hypertube cannon properly, it is going to involve a fair amount of trial and error. Much like the conveyor belt launcher, the height at which you build your Hypertube cannon can affect the overall distance that you travel due to its firing arc. The higher up it is, the farther you'll be able to go. Now, despite this, building the cannon higher up or down low has its advantages and disadvantages. In this form of transportation, we can increase or decrease our speed, distance, and height by simply changing the length of the cannon, by adding or removing Hypertube entrance segments, and by changing the orientation of the exit tunnel as well, without ever having to change the location of the cannon in terms of height. But one advantage of building the cannon higher up is that we can maintain a lower angled firing arc, which can allow you to fly over steeper terrain, but whilst also keeping you lower to the ground, allowing you to see past the fog and stay within the game's render distance. This overall will help you plan out your landing and makes making future adjustments to your cannon easier to do, whereas building it lower to the ground, you may have to increase the angle of your firing arc in order to overcome steep terrain, which may shoot you higher up into the sky, which can throw you up into the fog and way past the game's render distances, making it difficult to plan out your landing and in making future adjustments to your cannon difficult to do. Overall, I find it better to build the cannon higher up, with the only major downside being that it is slightly more inconvenient to build, and in addition, it may be difficult to cleanly incorporate it into your factory. Also, the amount of entrance segments that your Hypertube cannon consists of will determine how far you get launched. The more entrance segments you have, the further you'll go. But be careful not to make it too long, as building it too long can throw you outside the map, or literally send you to space. Also, be careful where you point it as well, as pointing it into the ground or the side of a cliff can, well, yeah. I'll briefly mention some Hypertube cannon build links that you could use to get started. Everyone's world and factory is going to be completely different, so it is impossible to state with a high degree of accuracy as to what length, orientation, or height in which you should construct your cannon. However, a good base to build off of that I found is as follows. I recommend building your cannon anywhere from 11 to 16 segments long, with 11 segments being good for short range jumps and 16 segments being good for cross-map travel. So far, in this example, I have placed the Hypertube cannon entrance and exit very close to the main part of the cannon, and in line with it as well. However, you can place the entrance and even the exit anywhere in relation to your cannon. The entrance benefits greatly from this, as you can place it anywhere without suffering any downsides. You can incorporate it into your factory in clever and interesting ways, or you can just simply place an entrance far away from the cannon to avoid hearing loss without having to constantly flick a power switch. To create an alternate entrance, simply place down a Hypertube support directly up against the original entrance of your cannon. You can then drag out a Hypertube tunnel from it and place it in a location of your choosing. Then add a Hypertube entrance to that new support that you placed down, and of course power it as well. And this will complete your alternate entrance, which you can of course place anywhere you want. We can place an exit anywhere in relation to the cannon, but unlike the entrance, the exit will suffer some downsides to this, because the longer our exit tunnel is, the more momentum we will lose over time, which can drastically reduce the distance that we could travel. It is recommended to build the exit of your cannon as short as necessary. The Hypertube cannon is also quite reliable now, at least until a new update breaks it. So long as you don't make any movements while mid-flight, then a completed and fully set up Hypertube cannon will consistently land you in the same exact spot almost every single time, meaning that you could place down a huge jelly landing pad in the exact spot where your cannon lands you, allowing you to lose the jetpack or parachute altogether. But I'd still recommend that you bring it though, just in case. As you can see, we can manipulate Hypertubes to fling us out at insane speeds to get us to all corners of the map and even beyond that. This is by far the fastest way to travel across the map. And once you get it set up properly, you will never have to worry about slugging your wimpy legs across the map to travel between bases again. And with that, that brings us to the end of this video on the Hypertube cannon. I do hope that you learned something of value. If you did, then consider liking and subscribing. As always, I've been Toaster, peace out.